James Mirtle, senior managing editor at The Athletic. What's up, brother?
Is this going to be positive hour here, you think?
No.
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. Yeah. 3 losses in a row is like, I know what kind of show this is going to be.
Yeah, well, I will say, it's not even about the 3 losses in a row, though, because I'm gonna expand on this, right? I'm having you on for, it's the middle of the year for the Toronto Maple Leafs, right? We have half a season of games. And I do Leafs talk, and one of my pet peeves, one of the ways to get at my, is it get your goat? You get your... Yeah, it's get your goat, right? I think that's a saying. That's what gets under your skin, right? No?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Get your goat. Yeah, yep. Right. You didn't say anything, so I was like, wait, is it not that? Some people get my goat when they say it's one game, right? Or now you're being negative because they lost. And I go, all right, I don't know what you want me to do. It's a post-game show. It's one show. I'm talking about the one thing. But with the Leafs, it is never one game. It is never one thing because we have so much of a sample of this group, and there are things that have carried over from seasons. There are things that carry over from stretches. And I think that there's a lot of things that have basically been hallmarks of this particular season. So we're at the midway mark. This is a team that is 21-20, okay? They got 8 loser points in there. They got 8 loser points. They got 13 regulation wins. And yeah, they've had, I would say, some good hockey played. Have they played great? Have they played great this year to you? Has there been a stretch of, wow, this team looks awesome? Like they look great?
A few games. Maybe.
I would say some periods, right? There was the Boston game where they played really well, but few and far between. What would you say is the defining characteristic so far of this season, halfway through, of this Maple Leafs team?
I would say compared to the other recent seasons that have been part of this core group of players, having a contending team or at least hoping to be a contending team, I would say what's really stood out to me is they've taken a step back defensively that we haven't seen for a few years. Like we haven't seen a Leafs team this defensively porous and inept in probably that last season that fell apart. 2019-20 is the one that comes to mind for me. And I know on Leafs Talk, you were saying this is starting to feel like 2020 a bit to you. Mm-hmm. The big difference is that the core is not 22 years old anymore. The core is 26, 27 years old, Matthews, Marner, Nylander. They're right in their prime. And I'm not saying it's just those guys. I'm just saying this is supposed to be a huge season for the organization and for this team. And part of the conversation that I've seen come up a lot the last few weeks is, can they invest assets in this group the way that they've played, how poor they are defensively? Can they give up first round picks? Can they trade prospects to try and bolster this team? Is it worth doing? Which is a bizarre conversation to have given where they're at. It should be a complete no-brainer that this team is a contender right now. And at the halfway point, if they're a contender, they're right on the fringes there. What's their record? 10th, 11th in the NHL?
Yeah, 11th.
They're on pace for 100 points, which is lower. I think most reasonable people thought this team was going to be worse than last year. Mm-hmm. I had them around 105, 106. That's kind of where I thought they'd be. They're worse than that. And there are elements of their record, the overtime losses, getting amazing goaltending from Woll and I was not Samsonov, Woll and Martin Jones. There's some elements of their record that have been unsustainable too. Mm-hmm. So they're on pace for 100 points, but also you can make the argument that that's probably painting them a little bit better than they've actually been.
I think that's fair. Because to me, the regulation thing was like really widely discussed, and then it sort of went away, and now it does feel back. But you're among the cellar dwellers of the NHL when it comes to regulation wins, right? Like you're 25th in the NHL in that category. And to your point about the defensive stuff, those metrics are not flattering across the board. Like they're 12th in the NHL, like 12th worst team in high danger chances against. That's them. The teams that are among them, there's not a lot of good in there. There's only one. There's only one team that you could consider I would say, as they are, a fringy contender in the Vancouver Canucks that is worse. But everybody else below them is, San Jose Sharks, Chicago Blackhawks, Buffalo Sabres, Columbus Blue Jackets, Montreal Canadiens, Anaheim Ducks, right? Like that's the company that you're keeping in terms of your ability to keep the other team from the dangerous spots on the ice. And they've had this is the scariest part. They've had a weak schedule to start the season. Like, sure, they had the travel with Sweden, but like what adversity have they really faced so far when it comes to the schedule? I think this is the problem with the team is they're getting by, and I called them once during the year the just enough guys, because that's what it feels like every single night. You're getting just enough for these wins. You're getting just enough to get into overtime, just enough to get a point, just enough to feel okay. But underneath it all, none of this feels like, so far anyways, that they're headed towards or they're barreling towards a deep playoff run. No,
it doesn't. I mean, it feels like Groundhog Day a little bit. And I, like last year, there were a couple of years in the last couple of years where they played well defensively. And last year, the first half of the season, their record was really good. And they had tons of injuries. And there was really a lot of signs that, hey, when this team gets healthy, when they make an addition at the deadline, they remember how well like Mark Giordano played in the first half of last year.
Of course.
They had the makeshift blue line, and they won a lot of games. And it was like, there might be something here. Like, this team's really battling. They're really fighting through that adversity. This team now, I mean, other than Woll being out, they haven't had a lot of injuries. I mean, you look at their man games lost, they're like bottom third in the league right now. None of the stars have missed games, technically. What's happened is that they just kind of look, some of the key pieces look older. TJ Brody doesn't look like a top pair defenseman right now. They don't have an answer internally for that. Tavares does not look like an $11 million player or anything close. He's on pace for 64 points or something this season.
Mm-hmm.
And that's before we get into some of the bigger, I mean, the fourth line has been, for the most part, really bad this year. You look at the defensive results. I mean, they're paying David Kampf to be, he's probably the highest paid fourth line center in the league, and his line's getting filled in every night.
Mm-hmm.
And they were out there for another key goal there against Detroit. And I mean, I don't know who else you want to talk about. Matthew Nyes is really struggling right now. He's on the fourth line. He's not even on pace for 30 points. He's people talked about Tyler Bertuzzi. Yeah, you can pay him 5.5 because he's going to get 30 goals. And I don't know if he's going to get 30 points. So there's a lot of things on the list that haven't come together for this team.
That's it. That's the problem. And I think that some people are looking at it, and the other thing that gets my goat is when people are like, you're negative. This is being negative. This is negative talk. And I go, I'm just trying to say what we're seeing here and what is actually there. Because if you just look at the standings, for example, it feels very familiar, right? Leafs are third in the Atlantic. That's where they like to be. Second or third in the Atlantic is sort of the Leafs' calling card over the last all the seasons, right? That's their move. It's the new, it used to be the Leafs were 9th or 10th in the Eastern Conference and never bottoming out and also not making the playoffs. And now the new version of that is sit in second, sit in third, and maybe you'll end up getting there. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point is if you would say, hey, what are the overwhelming positives this season? You would say, well, man, Austin Matthews looks just completely back as a goal scorer. That's more important than anything on the team. And I would say, yep, I agree. Wow, you've really gotten one hell of a season from William Nylander in a contract year. Well, it's not a contract year anymore. It's that motivation's gone. He's got his money. So whatever you think that's worth, I think it's worth something. All right, that's your second positive is William Nylander looks like the step that he took last year is very real. And you're doing that. What's the third one? It's probably, hey, Martin Jones is really good for you, has been very, very solid for you. Wait. The third story of the season is that your number 3 goaltender is playing way above his head? That's not great. That's not a great number 3 story to have. Me would probably say Morgan Riley's been brilliant, and, he's actually just always criminally underrated because even this stretch, I've got it written down for tonight's show. I think he's got 7 points in his last 6 games, right? Is that right? Anyway, it's something around there, and he's been a stalwart for them on the blue line. But yeah, once you get deeper, it's not a lot of hits. It's not a lot of unanimously positive stories for this team.
No, and the conversation around them has been, even going back to the summer, that they need help on the blue line, which they do, and that Tree Living wasn't happy with his blue line and wanted to make changes, and it hasn't happened yet. And
I don't know how they do that. I really don't.
Yeah.
I don't know how you take your first round pick going into next year and shop it for blue line help when the names that appear to be available right now are not great. And now you have Calgary once again doing their thing of pushing for the postseason. And if I'm them, I'm not moving off of one of my guys for anything other than like an extreme premium, right? Like why would you trade Tanev at this point?
Calgary's worried about getting caught with UFAs that won't sign. So, that's the thing they're thinking about. They don't want to have an exodus of talent without getting anything back. So it sounds like they're going to try and dance in both directions. They're going to try and push for the playoffs and maybe make some sort of move, but that's a really hard thing to do. And the fact that they haven't done it yet. But yeah, you're right. I mean, let me play devil's advocate. How do you not trade your first round pick? I mean, it's going to be one of the last years with this core group in their supposed prime. Like, if anything, the degree of difficulty is harder next year. Tavares is going to be another year older. The core guys are going to be making more money. Is next year a better chance? Like, what's going to be better? I mean, it feels. I can see people arguing, 2 years from now, Tavares will be off the cap, but what are you going to do? Punt 2 years? I mean, I think you have to keep trying to win this year.
Here's the worst part. I agree with you. But I also don't, because I'm bitter and I'm sour about this. This is one of my things that actually upsets me a lot about the way that their contracts are structured. It's never just, hey, does this person deserve this percentage of the cap or whatever, something around this percentage of the cap, or all the oxygen that we've taken up when it comes to the core four and whether it works and blah, blah, blah. It's this added layer of, well, every single year you have to be pushing assets out of your organization that are going to come back to bite you in the ass. And even this year where, like, I remember when the Nick Ritchie trade happened, right? It was, hey, it's just a second round pick, right? And hey, at least they got off that contract. And you go, okay, but those picks matter. And what happened this year? Maybe they could have gotten Tanev earlier. Maybe they are in on Tanev further down the line or at a cheaper price if they have their second round pick. And I'm so tired of this team feeling that way of, well, you have to trade your first. You have to trade your first. There's a scenario this year. I think that people should be entertaining it. I personally believe the Leafs are going to make the playoffs. I do. I don't think that they're going to completely go into a disaster. I think that there is too much talent on the roster, that they will find their way in. Plus, they're just a good regular season team. They'll win. They will
91% chance of making the playoffs right now.
Exactly. But I was just going to say, do I think it's a less than 10% chance that they miss? No. I think that there's pretty clearly a blueprint for if they miss. Like, boy, what happens if Martin Jones is bad? Like, what happens if Martin Jones regresses back to the sub-900 guy that we've seen from the last couple of years, right? What happens if Joe Woll comes back and he's not the savior, or he gets hurt again, considering he's a guy who gets hurt all the time? I think that there is a way to look at this moving forward and say, you could end up missing, and that draft pick could end up being even better than you thought it was going to be. Like, I don't know. I just, if you were telling me, hey, you're trading that pick or you're trading that prospect and it's bringing something in that really is materially changing things for you, I would go, all right. But the way that I feel today, and maybe it's recency bias, maybe I'm just being an idiot, is like, I kind of feel like they're closer to where the Flames are, where and that's why I keep saying it's 2020. You go to the deadline. If you feel like the team has shown you something extra, then you shop that first and you shop other picks. And if they're more of this, if they carry what we've seen through 41 games into, 55 games, then I'm looking at stuff going, could we get something back for TJ Brody? Because he looks old and he looks not like a top pairing guy. And is there really a gap between him and Simon Benoit at this point? Which is shocking to say, but that's how I feel in my heart. When I watch these games, I don't feel like there's a material difference between those two players. Hey, can you get back an asset for somebody? Like that. That's how I feel about the Leafs, is that they're closer to the Flames than they are the Oilers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I understand the fear of, if they're hanging right there and they're only a couple points up on ninth place in the East, which is, then how can you trade that first round pick? I mean, remember when they traded the first to get out of the Patrick Marleau contract?
Yeah.
And then they miss, right? And then that pick is 13th overall, and Carolina gets Seth Jarvis, who's a really good young player, who would look really good on a left wing line. on a line for the Leafs right now. So that makes sense to me. I mean, they'd have to either. That's going to be the danger for them. Like they need the team to show more in order for them to do something before the deadline. Like they need to be more solidly into even if it is third in the Atlantic, they need to be more solidly in that position by the deadline.
Mm-hmm. All I will say is, again, if you think that this is too negative, this is through half of the season, and you can say that there's been the Joe Wool injury, but I don't think that they've gotten goaltending that has been crazy below what you would have expected from Joe Wool, right? You can say that the Samsonov games, that they could have had more Martin Jones and Wool splitting them, whatever, that's fine. But outside of that hasn't been a major storyline for the Leafs. If they were losing these games because they had bad goaltending, I would be on here going, they need to trade for a goalie. They need to swallow the price, whatever the hell it is. They got to figure something out. They got to call up Hildeby. This team is going to get reinforcements. And once they can get around, that hasn't been the story for this team, despite them getting very, very, very poor goaltending from Samsonov. But your friend Jonas, like at The Athletic, at your site, put this list together for the Leafs. 25th with 13 wins in regulations that we went over, which is, not good. The only teams that you're ahead of, Ottawa, Minnesota, Anaheim, Columbus, Chicago, San Jose, Montreal. Okay, so you don't think that's worth everything? They've only held a lead for 844 minutes, which is 19th in the NHL. They're 12th in goal differential. They rank 20th in goals against per game, 19th in expected goals defensively at 5-on-5, and they have the 24th ranked penalty kill in the NHL. That's a laundry list of things to clean up. That's not just like one or two things or a little bit more chemistry here. That's just a lot of holes. So I hope they end up shoring some of these things up. I'm not sure that they will. My next question to you, though, is out of all those things, do you think that part of it is coaching? Because right now it feels like there's a lot of hot seat talk, right? Sheldon Keefe's seat, which is getting to a point where I'm like, wait, what? Can we have some other term for this? Can we have some other way of discussing it? But yeah, do you think that if they bring in another coach, something can materially change with this team? Should they be looking at that as an option right now?
Well, I mean, I don't think he's a huge part of the problem right now, but the reality is if either Tree Living's struggling to make a trade or he's on the fence about making a trade just because of where the team's at, that's the easiest button to push. I mean, what's Keefe right now? He's like the fifth or sixth most tenured coach in the NHL, and he came in November 2019. Coaches don't last very long, and part of it's the cap, and it's hard to make moves, and part of it is teams get in this situation where they need a button to push to change something, and that's, like I said, that's the easiest thing for them to change. So, the scenario I see where potentially the seat gets hotter, to use your favorite analogy, is if they really struggle here. Like if they win only 5 of their next 10 or 11 games and they're playing a lot of really good teams, if they don't rise to that challenge, you could be looking at the standings and being, oh boy, we're tied with Detroit, and all of a sudden you're in the wild card mix with Philadelphia, Washington, Pittsburgh's been winning a lot lately, and you're getting nervous. And that's when if you can't make a trade, that's when you might look at that. But like I said, I don't think I think if you put together a list of all the problems this year, like what number would Keefe be? I think he'd be pretty low on that list.
I totally agree. The only thing I'm saying here is how many of the issues can you point to and say, well, it could actually improve even a little bit if he's gone? And I would say some. I would say some. And to me, again, to go back to blaming the core four, which I am in a lot of this, because that is just if you're building the team and the premises that you can get it done, like it shouldn't be shocking that, hey, oh, wow, you have other guys down the lineup that aren't really working out, or you have a thin blue line, or you're thin in net. These are the byproducts of having that. Yes, it's great to have good talent. But when they went into this offseason, you and I have discussed this about Keefe, where part of it I do believe was settling down the organization, giving him that extension and saying, we're all on the same page here. We're all moving in the right direction. But is this not the coach that they wanted? This is not the coach that they've all stumped for publicly and privately. And so now it's if there's motivational issues, right? Or if the voice is getting stale in the room, then you guys as players are complicit in this as well. Like, what do you want now? So now you want your third coach. You want another voice. Now you want someone that's going to be tougher on you to show up here. Sheldon Keefe, I think there's there's a view that he's like this big players coach, that he is not tough on guys at all. I don't really get that that's the case, but whatever. It's like Craig Berube is going to come in here and all of a sudden everyone's going to snap into line and play better defensively. I'm not overly convinced, but yeah, is there at least a name to you that you think right now they would be looking at and saying, hey, maybe we should pull the trigger on this person? Because I don't think it can be in-house.
No, I think Berube is probably the one that makes the most sense just because he's won recently, and I'd have to dig deeper into kind of the defensive results there. I know Blues fans weren't very happy with him by the end, and I know they were having troubles on their blue line. But, I mean, the things you can point to with Keefe that usually fall on the coaching staff are, why is the penalty kill terrible? I mean, some of it's personnel, like they lost some of their penalty killers, but they shouldn't be this bad.
Yeah, they shouldn't be bottom 10.
They're terrible. Mm-hmm. They're terrible. Like they brought in Dean Chenoweth from Carolina, and they always had the best penalty kill. Remember when they first brought Chenoweth in, and they were really, really good. And it's like he's still there. You know, what's going on with this? And just defensively in general, I mean, that's got to, at the end of the day, fall on the coach, even if the personnel is not that well equipped to play a good defensive style. And I think one criticism I would make of Keefe over the weekend was, you look at that Colorado game, they get out of the first period. It was 3-0 after the first, I believe, if my old man memory is holding up here.
Correct.
3-0 out of the first. Your best line's your third line, but you're up by 3. So Keefe's math is, I don't feel comfortable playing that third line because they're not good defensively, and I don't want to give up this lead. But those were the guys that were going.
I agree.
They should have, if they didn't like the other lines, they should have scrambled some of those guys higher into the lineup. And I think there's a conservatism, and there's a safeness to some of the things he's doing. You know, not wanting to play Hildeby or Samsonov against San Jose doesn't make sense to me. You know, that's a team you could beat with anybody in net. You know, the way that those games went. But there's a fear, because I think partly of the way they've played and where they are in the standings and what's at stake this season, that they're being really conservative, and they're scared to play some of the players who aren't great defensively, and I think it's hurting them at times, and I think they're making the wrong decisions in the lineup at times because they're afraid.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's actually right now the most fair criticism of Sheldon Keefe is, I think great coaches learn, like they adjust to their personnel, right? Like that's a across the sports calling card of great coaches. You give them the personnel and you say, all right, we're going to make the best out of it. How many guys have taken a real step forward this year under Sheldon Keefe? Right? We just went through the positive storylines. Who do you feel like you're getting the most out of? Who do you feel as though, like, you know, I think that there's been some really good Domi games mixed in here, or there's some nights where he is absolutely going, and then you look down and he's playing 11 minutes, right? And you say, well, what did you expect him to do? All because of exactly that fear. I don't think that Sheldon Keefe has gotten the most out of Brad Treliving's guys. And if I was Treliving and I was looking at my roster and saying, all right, it's not doing as well as I had hoped this season, of course. Are there some guys that are disappointing? Do I feel like we're a Stanley Cup contender? No. But that is the one part of the Sheldon Keefe thing that I say, here's the most interesting aspect of potentially moving off of him is, can you get more from the personnel that you have here, the talent that you have here, which is very clear, with somebody else with fresh eyes that doesn't come in with those prejudices?
Maybe. I mean, like I said, it's the easiest button to push, which is why teams do it all the time. So I'm not ruling out that they might do it.
God, wouldn't it be so weird if they do it heading into the All-Star weekend, though? It's like, hey, welcome to Toronto, where we just fired our coach, and it's bad.
Well, I can see they probably, I mean, they're not going to do it like right the day before or something like that, but it's going to depend how they play. I mean, that's the bottom line here. You know, can they had some better defensive performances, the game against Carolina, the game against LA. I mean, obviously it's Anaheim and San Jose, but they played well defensively there. They played well in the one game against Columbus. Like, they need to turn that corner, because that's what they did last year, where you could point to it and they had that skeleton crew on the blue line. It's like, here's what this coaching staff is doing. But this year there's so many holes. And I think probably looking at Domi is probably the right. I mean, when Domi gets traded to Dallas last year near the deadline, and they weren't playing him 10 minutes a game. I mean, he was third line center. Mm-hmm. You know, they had a deep playoff run. He played a lot. And Domi is what he is. He's going to give things back on the other end. And I wonder if, like, just with the personnel that they've got, like, maybe they need to get a little bit more comfortable with him being what he is, and he's going to be a creator and a disruptor. And maybe they need to go back to trying him again with some of the big guys. I mean, he doesn't have. The last I looked, the player that was fifth in scoring in the Leafs was Yarncroc, who's been playing on the third line almost all year. And it just shows how much of their offense is in the top four.
Yeah.
And with Tavares taking a big step back, it's really the top three. And if those guys don't produce in a night, they're not getting a lot. They're not getting enough from Bertuzzi. They're not getting enough from Domi, in part because he's not playing. And there's, Nyes is struggling. There's not a lot else there's not a lot of other offensive points. Mm-hmm. And I know the Leafs are fifth or sixth or whatever in the NHL in scoring. They're generating offense. But if the way that this team is built is that they need to be first or second in scoring, not fifth or sixth.
Totally.
They're gonna have to lean into that identity because that's what they got right now.
Yeah. I hate I can't do the criticize Nyes too much. I feel like way too much was put on his shoulders going into this season. Is a kid. Yeah, it was just, hey, look, Nyes played great in the playoffs. You go, boy, it's gonna be a rookie that has to now go through 82 games and is playing up the lineup and has to fit. It was a lot, but how much of this, honestly, do you think is Tavares and Decline? Because he's had stretches of play. We've done this before, right? Like, what was it? Was it last year where he started the year slow and we were having all the questions about whether he and Nylander can play together and whether he was done as a player, and then you finish the season and you go, actually, it was very much a Tavares season. But lately, hasn't been great. Hasn't been a great start to January, which has included games against the Sharks where 7 games he's got 3 points and only 1 goal.
Yeah. I mean, he's got, I think I sent you the stat. I think he's got 15 points in 25 games, on pace for lowest goal per game output in his career. The big thing that's fallen off for Tavares, if you look at the numbers, is last year he had put up a ton of offense on the power play.
Yeah. And
it really papered over how far back his even strength production had fallen. If you look at even strength goals and points per minute for him last year, he was way down the list of players around the league. And you're paying him a lot of money, and he's your second line center, and he's part of the engine that drives your team, or he needs to be. And he really wasn't that last year at even strength. He really wasn't giving you a lot. And he's part of, you see them struggling defensively. I saw there was a big debate online over who was out there near the end of the game against Detroit when they lost. But I feel like Sheldon Keefe doesn't think he has a lot of lines he can trust right now. And I think at times that Tavares line is one of the lines he feels like he can't trust.
Well, yeah, you saw that when they blended the lines.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I don't know, with the way he skates and with how everything's fallen off for him at even strength, it does feel like he would be better kind of in the Stamkos role with what they've done in Tampa. But the problem for the Leafs is they don't have a lot of other options to play down the middle. And it's why they tried the Nylander thing out in training camp for 4 seconds, but in an ideal world, they need another center, and they need to have the option that Tavares isn't always your number 2 center.
Yeah, I agree, but this is why, to me, I'm sticking with these blended lines for a little while longer. I want to take a longer look at the Domi-Marner pairing.
Yep, I agree.
Like that's one where if you're saying, hey, all right, you're going to embrace the personnel we have. These aren't changing over the next month, and you need to win these games. Play Domi more. Play him with Marner, who he's shown some flashes with, and see if you can just rely upon those guys to create offense for you. I don't even care who stays on the left wing with them, but yes, balance out your roster. Try to see how it works this way, and exhaust all of the options and try it for the next week and a half, because I think that's going to determine it. Is, hey, do things change? Do things get better? Do you feel like some of these guys are starting to take a step forward and that your roster looks a little bit more balanced and powerful and threatening against some really good teams? Awesome. If you get embarrassed by I think it's 5 of their next 6 games are against Canadian teams, right? Yeah, because it's Oilers, Canucks, Flames,
Vancouver, Seattle, Winnipeg,
and two Jets games. I think out of those games, you gotta win. You gotta win 3. You gotta win 3. Like you go sub 500 in those, and I think that's where you say, all right, new coach.
It could be. And I think the thing that Keefe is going to be worried about here is going with those blended lines on the road is a different proposition than at home, where you can feel safe and you can protect people. And, you're going to have you go Domi and Marner on a line, they're going to be up against McDavid or Draisaitl for sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen.
This is Charlie Montoyo, though. You go out west, and if you do well, you come back home. You don't, enjoy a vacation out there maybe a little while longer but before you return to the city. That's the way that I think things are going. All right. I think that's it for me because you agree with me on sticking with the blended lines. So that's it for today. I think that was fine. I don't think that was too negative. We just said possibly fire the coach.
I don't think it's time for all-out panic right now about this team, but they certainly haven't inspired anyone to think that this is the year that they've had a lot of regular seasons better than this one and fallen short in the playoffs. So why would anyone really truly believe in this team right now?
Well, here, this is the way that I can summarize it because this is the way that I've been thinking about it is when this offseason happened, so much of it was, well, the Leafs need secondary scoring, right? It was, they've gone in the playoffs and they've had this formula where they try to be a really tight defensive team. Why don't you bring in some more offensive players, the Bertuzzis and the Domis and the Klingbergs? And I know he's out, but I'm just saying that the big premise was get more scoring around these guys, take some of the pressure off of these guys. And you've gotten brilliant seasons from two of your top three. And I think a good season from Mitch Marner, one that's again, just really underrated because Marner just does not resonate with this fan base and he never gets the proper credit. He doesn't score a lot of goals, right? And when he disappears, he's completely vanishes from hockey games. I get it. But overall, your three top guys have been everything you want and more. Everything you want and more. The rest of the roster has just not given you the secondary scoring. The blue line doesn't score. The other guys don't score. And I think some of it is opportunity with the coach. Some of it is the personnel. Some of it is the situation put in. But it's like, okay, so you haven't gotten better offensively, which was clearly the plan. Have you gotten better defensively? No, you've taken a huge step back. Have you gotten tougher? No. Like, what? You think this is a tough team? Do these guys look really tough? They play for one another? No. Do they fold? Yeah, they do. So what were your hallmarks of success? So far, you're hitting none of them other than the one thing that you always have basically down in pen, which is that your top three younger players are awesome. And now there's more cause for concern about Tavares, as you outlined, and I'm with you. But yeah, what else have you accomplished? Not much. That's a pretty tough marker. That's a pretty tough way to look at this, and that's why. And if you're doing the report cards, yeah, I will verbally say it. It's a C+.
Yeah, I would say at best. And this is going to be a huge 2 weeks for this team. Their schedule gets really tough here, and they need to show if there's something more there or not.
I agree. James Mirtle, Senior Managing Editor at The Athletic. Talk to you next week, brother.
Thanks, JD.